Morning, good afternoon, and good evening from our headquarters in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is Doug Brunke of the Global Chamber, and we are very thankful for our three speakers today. It's the eve of U.S. holiday Thanksgiving, and it's a time of year that forces us to think about who we're thankful for, and we're thankful for all of our members and all of the folks who are diligently working on exporting every day of the year. And all three of these people are full of knowledge, full of enthusiasm, and you're going to really enjoy them. We're going to first go to Charlotte, North Carolina with Stephen McDonnough. He's the CEO at ProGlobalPartners. Stephen is not just, we know that he's an expert, but he's actually stamped a NASBIT certified global business professional. He's got a real passion for what he's doing. He's been helping companies do their exporting, and he's learned a lot in that journey, haven't you, Stephen?
Absolutely.
We look forward to hearing from you today. Thank you for taking the time.
Perfect. Very good. Well, definitely thank you for having me. As I was explaining earlier, we've started our company, ProGlobalPartners, I want to say almost 5 years ago, and it's been a very long and interesting journey. But when we started, none of our partners had any experience selling internationally. However, we had a network, a global network of relationships, and we realized that we can be that conduit for international business, helping U.S. companies sell their products and services overseas. At the same time, we also saw opportunities on the ground in some of the markets that we were in, and we started doing project development as well. So now we're able to provide turnkey export management solutions in addition to project development with financing for projects overseas. Starting out, we, as I mentioned, not knowing much of anything when it comes to international trade, we had to identify a lot of the local associations and organizations related to international business. So these are a lot of the chambers, as an example. So your Asian chambers, your Caribbean chambers, the Hispanic chambers of commerce. But attending those events, we're able to start building our local network that will also support our international business. We participated in quite a few local international nonprofit organizations. So one in particular here in Charlotte is the International House, but they are the entry point to immigrants and those from overseas coming into the area. So they would actually help with immigration, other resources that someone new to the area would need. Then there are also a lot of trade and industry associations that we started working with and participating at some of their events. But all of those helped to build our foundation for our network locally. In addition, we had to learn quite a bit around the government resources on the federal, state, and local level. We realized that was going to be another key component to supporting our international business, since the government regulations plays a role in every transaction that we do internationally as far as setting the laws and things of that nature. So we were introduced to the Export Assistance Center through the Department of Commerce. I guess each market has an Export Assistance Center, but there's someone tasked with being your point of contact when you start to export, because they have the relationships with the various embassies overseas with the U.S. Commercial Services. So as an example, when we travel to new countries, we make sure that we go to the embassies based on an introduction from our local Export Assistance Center contact person, who would then introduce us to the U.S. Commercial Services officer or specialist in that foreign market that will give us the lay of the land from a government perspective to help us understand some of the things that we need to know and do, what areas not to go, things of that nature. That's on the federal level. On the state level, we work closely with the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. They are the state level resource when it comes to exporting. So through that group, you can access various resources, including STEP grants that I believe it's the Small Business Administration provides to U.S. companies wanting to export. But they also have offices overseas in various countries, and they can also be a resource to get you information and know how. They do a number of trade missions. So they bring companies to the state of North Carolina, but they also participate in trade shows overseas as well. So as you look at your local market or wherever you're located, understanding what state resources are available. Lastly, the city of Charlotte has an office. They have an international group, and here it's the Charlotte International Cabinet, but they lead the Sister City program. So we were able to connect with them because one of the first markets that we went to was Ghana back in 2013, 2014. But we didn't know at the time that Charlotte had a sister city relationship with Kumasi. That's one of the cities in Ghana. So we were able to use the city of Charlotte's relationship to have additional access points overseas. There are many other government agencies tied to international trade. For example, the Exim Bank, they help with financing and things like that. But when you're just starting out, it's really understanding what are the government agencies, and then what resources or services do they offer, and how can you benefit based on your company's goal or objective. Let's see, also understanding what certifications and educational resources are available. So some of the things that we use, and I still use it to this day, is one is the basic guide to exporting. You all can Google that, but that was, I believe it was commissioned through the Department of Commerce, but U.S. Commercial Services and all of those agencies typically use that book. It's an online ebook. The Global Entrepreneur is another book that NASBIT uses, but it has almost everything that you would need to know when it comes to doing business globally. You should also tap into some of the local university programs, things of that nature. The last part is really familiarizing yourself with the core components of an international transaction. We found that if we didn't break it down to those 5 core components, which are every transaction as a buyer, a seller, the government regulations, as I mentioned before, trade finance, and also professional support services, so your logistics, your attorneys, your CPAs, things of that nature. If we didn't break it down to understand those 5 core components, then we would kind of just be out there and not really understanding who fit in what bucket. But that was extremely helpful. I'm not sure how much time I have left, maybe I'll say maybe 2 more minutes. But when it comes to exploring new markets, we wanted to make sure, in addition to doing local things, as I mentioned before, also spending time on the ground in these various markets. So if you want to do work in Mexico or the Philippines, some of those other regions, you have to spend time on the ground to understand the market, the culture, the people, how they live, how they think, et cetera. What's the business climate there? That's the only way that you would truly be successful in what you're doing. As I mentioned before, going to the embassies when you're in those markets, but also tapping into the embassies in DC or the consulates here in the US, because they are the access point to those foreign companies coming to the US looking for partnerships. So as long as they understand you and what services you're offering, they can potentially introduce you, or they may have various events being held here in the States that you can possibly attend. Last thing I'll mention, some of the things I would have done differently knowing what I know now. I grossly underestimated our point of revenue generation. So make sure you have enough runway when it comes to your projections, because very long sales cycles when it comes to international business. Luckily, I have a wife that loves me, and she was able to continue to support as we went through that process. Also, when starting out, we always tend to act like we know more than we really do. just manage expectation and don't try and do too much too soon. This is a learning business. You're going to learn every single day. I'm still learning things as we speak, and I'll continue to learn. So make sure you plan to learn, and also build a strong team around you, because there are going to be areas of weakness or opportunities, but make sure you have other people that can fill those areas of opportunity for you. So hope that helps, but good luck, and definitely feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm on LinkedIn. You can call me, whatever you need to do to ask me questions. But happy hunting.
Oh, that's awesome, Stephen. And just like your wife, or maybe in a little bit different way, we love you as well. So thank you for your membership. And you touched on a very important basic concept of really a lot of the reasons why we started Global Chamber is our own recognition, especially as I traveled city to city and saw different states and how they behave, different public-private partnerships, different cities, different trade organizations, city by city, that there's not any uniformity really between cities. There's a lot of variation between skill sets. One city can be spectacular and another city be not really at all involved with international. And so knowing that for an exporter is a really tricky thing, not just in their own city. It's one thing to know your own city. 99% of businesses don't even know what's in their own city, let alone, you know, the next city over, or cities in Europe or Africa or Asia. So thank you for going through that. Our next speaker is in the frigid north. Julia is in the United States as well. She's residing, and her business is headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She's the CEO, founder of Julia Knight Inc. And so we really appreciate, Julia, you sharing your experience. You've got some very specific knowledge of a market area, and so we're really looking forward to hearing about how that's worked out for you. It sounds like very well. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So let me start by telling you a little bit about what I do. So I design tableware and serveware, so things like bowls, platters, trays. They're high-end. It's kind of luxury goods, consumer products, and I manufacture in India, and then I sell to about 40 countries around the world, which sounds very impressive, but some of my customers are big, and some of my customers have like an order that's like $1,000 or $2,000. So I really cover a pretty broad range internationally. And the way that I got involved was after listening to one of our senators speak about how our gross national product, only about 3% of it, and I don't think it's changed that much, is exports. And I was so shocked by that, because here we're considered like a global leader in consumer ideas, and yet so little of what we make is being shipped overseas. And I think that there is a really good demand for American design, American ideas, American products, American technology. And I think what stops us is it just seems kind of overwhelming. Like, how do I start? So I think what Stephen covered in terms of some of the local resources is really important. I found that very valuable too. The way that I got started was kind of a quirky story, which is the Mayo Clinic is based here in Minnesota, and we get an international population of people coming for their medical care. And right outside of the hospital was a gift store that sold my products. And one day we got a call from them saying they needed 24 trays and 24 bowls. And I'm thinking, this is really unusual. What's going on? And it turned out to be the king and queen of Saudi Arabia, who really loved the product and wanted to bring it back as gifts. And that was what got me started, because I realized that what I have in common with everybody around the world is this love of having a connection with our family and friends around a table and serving food and having everything look beautiful and special. And if anything, that's a bigger attribute of international communities than it is in the United States. Like the Middle East, that is the center of, their home is the center of their entertainment, and they have people over almost every day. So I was selling at that time to Bloomingdale's, and I realized that they had a store in Dubai. So I actually went there and called the general manager of the store and said, I'd really like it if you would meet with me and see if I could get my products into your store. And they were just really impressed with the fact that I'd come over there, and they said, absolutely, we'll carry you. And it turned out to be quite successful for a period of time, and then they switched buyers, so I'm not in there anymore. But that was what really got me started. And then I realized that there was a big trade show in Paris. It's an international design show. And that's, I go to that every year. It's quite an expense, both in terms of travel and lodging and the expense of doing the show. But those shows are, that's a very big show for me. And that's where I found my Russian distributor and the distributor from South Korea. So it's really super valuable. And I found out that there's something called a STEP grant that Stephen also mentioned that helps you fund some of your international expansion, and trade shows are one of the things that they will accept for the grant. So there's nothing like being face-to-face and on the ground in front of your customers, and that I've done that twice a year for almost 5 years now, and it's a big chunk of time and it's a big chunk of money, and it doesn't always pay off because there was the time when it snowed 3 feet in Paris and nobody came to the show, but it's almost always been a good idea. And you just have to kind of keep investing in your future when you're doing international, because it takes a long time. So I'm also just going to touch for a minute on some of the logistics. I'm fortunate in that I'm not trying to find manufacturing, or I'm not trying to set up manufacturing in anywhere other than India. So it's not like when I expand to the Middle East, I'm setting up a water processing plant. I'm really just selling consumer products, but I still have the logistics of getting it there. And one of the key things in using U.S. resources is you've got to ship from the United States to be considered a U.S. export. So it might sound crazy that I manufacture in India and yet I'm considered a U.S. export, but so much value is added in the United States in terms of sales and marketing and overhead. I have to give them a spreadsheet showing exactly where I spend my money, and over 51% of it has to be U.S. contribution, which it easily is for me. And that, plus the fact that I ship from here, makes it a U.S. export and makes me eligible for their help and support through the grants and things like that. So I've learned to get payment before I ship. I've learned what Exim Bank is, because not only do they provide financing, but they provide receivables insurance, because they want us to be able to export without fear. And one of the scary things is shipping your products overseas and not knowing if you're ever going to get paid for it. And so they will finance up to 98% of your receivables for a very small rate. I think it's like 1.7% or something like that, which is basically like doing it for free. And if you don't collect the money within a certain period of time, I can't remember if it's 90 days or 6 months, they will give you the money back. And then they will work on collecting it, and it's no longer your responsibility. Now, the only problem that I have is that some of my biggest customers are in countries that they exclude. Like, you can't do it to Russia, and you can't do it with the Ukraine, and those happen to be places where I have big exports, like 100 grand at a time. And so that's where I really want it. And so getting people to pay me in advance, or at least 50% in advance, has been really critical. But that's not to say that it's impossible to collect receivables overseas, because I did use a company called ABC Omega. I had a big receivable in Poland, and I was not able to collect it after repeated phone calls. And I don't know what they did or what they threatened, but within a month I had the money. So that's a really good thing to know. But I guess I would say overall that I think that it's an important thing that we do for our economy. And I think that it's also an important thing that we do for world diplomacy, because there's nothing like establishing a business relationship with someone. I mean, I'm Jewish and I go to Saudi Arabia and I'm welcomed by them because basically I'm selling something that they like and they enjoy, and it's not about politics and it's not about religion. It's only about, goods and services. And it just makes us like real people to them instead of across a negotiating table. And so I think that that's a really wonderful thing that we're able to do to promote global diplomacy too, in our own special way. So I think that kind of wraps up what I would say for an introduction. But I'd love to answer any questions that people have at the end, and tell you some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of how it's happened. But overall, it's been a really important part of my business.
Thank you for giving us the couple things there. One is the kumbaya of that we, I think, all feel of when we do business across boundaries. There's a connection between cultures and between countries that goes way beyond perceptions and history, and so that's valuable. Also, and you may already be connected to them, but while I'm thinking of it, there's an organization in the U.S. and there are parallel organizations in other countries called Global Ties.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one.
So Minneapolis actually has a pretty strong one. So does Charlotte, and actually so does Dallas. I have been a past president of the Arizona chapter of Global Ties, and they focus in on citizen diplomacy and bring foreign visitors to the U.S. And other countries I've found do the same thing. But if you want to get involved in something that's doing that, they bring over 7,000, I believe, people a year from around the world, and they've been doing it for about 70 years. So wow. It's a long-standing, very successful organization managed by the State Department, U.S. State Department, that does what you described. It creates connections between people. The person who's just over my shoulder here is Sun Hyun Cho. He's going by Andy, and I'd like to know why it's Andy with that name, but he's a new intern at Global Chamber, and he is through a State Department program, not Global Ties, but another one where making connections between, in his case, international trade student working here at Global Chamber through next summer. These are the kinds of things we all recognize, like, wow, that makes sense. They learn and they also make a connection to our country, and so no matter what country you're in, you recognize that these things are valuable. So thank you for the information, and we do have some questions coming in, and those of you around the world who are out there listening, keep sending those in, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. Our next speaker is Yvonne Castro, and I had the really good fortune of speaking with her recently, just in the last couple of weeks, and I was just really excited to hear her progress, their success, and her own enthusiasm with their international business. She is the managing partner of HR Solutions at IP Living. We're kind of mixing product and service exporting, and so that'll be one of the areas of questioning that we'll talk about. Yvonne, you're in service exporting, and so thank you for taking the time today to share some of your insights.
My pleasure, Doug. Thank you so much for the invitation. And well, what I would like like to share with all of you, it's really how fascinating having seen this journey. And I will divide my experience, my comments in three important moments. The first one, it was before. It was really to identify if we were ready to go across borders, right? So that make us to put us in the table to ask us how strong was our business plan. So if I can share a tip with all of you, I will say that we find that it's very important to strengthen your capabilities as a business, creating a simple plan that not is understandable just for you, but also for your new partners and the new markets that you are going in. In our case, as you well mentioned, we have products and services. We have two main divisions in the company. One division is dedicated to technology, and other big division is dedicated to the business management and human capital. So with this analysis, we decide to identify what are our strengths, define what would be our ideal business model, and how we are going to operate. Because what we found is that once you decide to go into a market, it's really this deep understanding about the culture, about the way that you are going to conduct business there, and really have this sense that your company, it's a good fit and is going to add value to your new clients at the new markets. So the simplicity, I think it was a big component, an important lesson learning, because as you well mentioned, we have a great guidelines in terms of processes and steps, but between of them, we found that are these small gaps that can make the difference if you really understand what is the way that you are going to operate. So also a good experience for us is really do and go deeper in our capabilities as a team. And when I say these capabilities as a team, it's really go deeper in terms of see what languages speak our team, right? If we really understand the languages, if our marketing materials are communicating really what our services are, if this is understandable for our new markets and clients. And also this capacity to interact with different type of clients, different markets, different needs, and different pains. Because when we define your product of your services, you used to have a good understanding of your market. But when you really are going into a new market, it's really when you need to understand what are the pains that your clients are experiencing, and also what are going to be the gains that they are going to have if they are going to work with you. And so that was a very key learning in our journey. And also to develop the infrastructure to build a successful venture. It's absolutely easier, faster, and more enjoyable experience if you have a great backup support. And when I say backup support, is really all the institutions, all the people around you, all the key partners, all the clients that you already have, but maybe they have operation overseas, and to really look around your network to find great chambers and great key points of support that they possibly, or it's highly probable they could be interested in support you and in acquire your product or service. So if you work in this infrastructure, if you work to understand how easy it could be business if you are well connected, that definitely is going to help you a lot. And I will say that 3 tips, if I can share with you all, it's First, we definitely believe that everything is related with culture. So you really need to know everything about your company culture to identify what is your DNA as a company, right? That will help you really to identify potential clients, potential markets, and that's very important. And of course, it's really, really important to have this deep understanding of the new culture, to have this appreciation of the culture, understanding about points of where you are going to be similar, points where maybe you are going to be different, but really to build your company in a way that also represents the best for your company and the new company or the new market that you are going to, and your products and services are going to be a good representation of it. And the second big component, and it's the talent. Really, it's critical to identify your own capabilities in order to detect possible gaps that you need to develop, right? Let's say we are going to do business in Brazil. Yes, of course, it could be helpful if you speak Portuguese, right? Or it's going to be helpful if you are going to do business in France, that someone speak French, or in Canada, right? So it's very important to have this understanding about the capabilities, and also about your capabilities in deployment, supply chain, everything, all the basic competencies that you need to have to really do a great delivery and achieve the outcome. And the other important component that we found is critical if you want to do business across borders, it's really collaboration. We really believe that empower your people to make business easy is really important, right? Of course, always it's amazing and very powerful to have meetings face-to-face, but also we know that when you are cross borders, you need to be very creative, very effective, very resourceful, very conscious, aware about your investments, and have tried to reduce costs, but as well to try to operate with high effectiveness. So we believe that if you find a way to really empower your team and create this way to communicate, collaborate, is going to be seamless for everybody and more effective. And so what we do really, it's as we was sharing with you, we believe in simplicity. That helps us a lot because the business world sometimes is very complex. The exporting world, you know, it's very complex. You need to follow many guidelines, right? You need to have the necessary compliance, and everything related with process procedures is already there. So what we found that was very helpful in our case, we are exporting and having a strong operation mainly with Mexico, is really to understand the culture, really understand what market are we going, what type of culture is, how to conduct business there. Also very important to identify key person and key contacts in the new market. So really that helps us a lot. In the talent part, really understand what our capabilities are, what competencies our people have, what competencies do they need to have in the new market. But something very important that we found in this component is that when you transfer a service, the training part is a key part of success. So it's very important to understand how you are going to transfer and to share knowledge, and as well how you are going to measure the performance and the effectivity there, and how we are going to train also our new clients, our new markets, our new distributors, our new partners. It's very, very important that they understand the core of the core of the business, and really that's what makes us stronger. And in terms of collaboration, also establish a very, very clear operation model. How is going to be the communication internally if you have distributors, or if you have partners, or if you have affiliate partners. So whatever operation model you choose, it's very important that be very, very clear, very well defined. And when you work across border, the support is also a key component. You need to make sure that you are going to be available for your client and the market no matter what time is, right? No matter what problem is, you are going to be there to solve it. And the collaboration tools that you can provide to your team, mainly, and you know, probably the first phases of any successful business is related with the commercial part. So enable sales teams, commercial team, marketing team to really help to establish the first potential clients, and the market it's crucial. So this is what I will say. It's a brief introduction of an approach that we did, and we definitely believe that helped us a lot to succeed.
Thank you, Yvonne. That's really good information. I loved your last slide there with the information you had. We do have quite a number of questions, and so I'd like to start with the first question. It's actually to all of you, but Julia, we'll start with you because the question came in regarding your experience and a little bit of what Yvonne talked about, and that is having a plan. You had a realization of a market need through the Mayo Clinic and the King and Queen of Saudi Arabia, and somehow that transferred into you going to Dubai.
Mm-hmm.
And so how would you weave in the idea of a business plan and, from the market need point to actually going overseas for something like that? What was the process that you used, and how did that work out?
Well, I have to say that I'm a little bit more of an intuitive, strategic person. I mean, I don't have a formal, at that time I did not have a formal business plan. I just had the gut feeling that knowing what I know about Middle Eastern culture, that this was going to be a really good category for them, and it turned out to be right. I mean, I think, first of all, this is my fourth company that I've started and run. So I've been an entrepreneur for 35 years. I hope at this point I've got a little bit of a gut instinct for things. But I think that sometimes we can get really bogged down in writing out these complicated plans and making sure that we know absolutely everything about it. And I just took a flyer and it worked. So I figured in the worst possible case, I would see Dubai, which was something I always wanted to do. And in the best case, I would end up with a new customer. I didn't even contact them before I went over there. So yeah, that might sound kind of crazy, but that's really what happened. And I knew about the Paris show because I've always attended it, because it is the most important design show in the world, and it has an international clientele. It's based in Paris, but it's not for the European market anymore because that's more of a depressed consumer economy. And there's like a constant flow of people from the Middle East to that show. And I knew that that was true. So I just kind of added up all of the things that I knew from experience and said, what's the worst that could happen? And I just went for it.
Okay, and you didn't need the funding from anybody. You didn't need to go to someone and say, hey, could you fund this trip to Dubai? You did that on your own, so that just made it that much easier.
Exactly, because I do take a certain portion of my budget every year and say this is going to be for something totally new that and so I know that I've got that money set aside. At that time, I didn't know about the resources that were available to me, and my next big trip to the Middle East was on a trade mission. So I went to Saudi Arabia with a Minnesota trade mission. And I'm really glad I did it that way because, first of all, I don't think I would have been able to visit the country without it as a single woman. And so I kind of had an entourage, and it was great exposure to the culture. I learned a lot from it.
Okay, so you mentioned a best practice there, and do I have it right? Did you work at 3M during your career?
No, I started out at Estee Lauder and Revlon in international marketing. So I traveled worldwide, so I felt really comfortable knowing I could get on a plane and land and figure things out.
Fantastic. And so you're the consumer mindset and understanding the consumers and having an intuitive feel for it as well. The 3M concept that you just sort of mentioned was putting aside some money every year just to do whatever, right? So, and I think, at least my understanding, 3M was a competitor to when I worked in the DuPont company, and I was always amazed at their concept of setting aside money for people within the company to do pretty much anything. And you kind of just talked about that, and that probably would be a good thing for a lot of exporting companies. Just, hey, set aside some money and just use it based on your gut, which you were able to do.
And if I could add one quick thing, one of the things that the commercial service does, they have a gold key program. And if you're really focused on a country or a region, for $500 a country, they will do all the research for you. And they will, if you want to meet with distributors, they'll find you distributors, they'll find you sales outlets. I mean, I didn't find it useful because they don't know anything about the category that I'm in, and it's somewhat specialized. So I didn't use it in the end, but it can be very valuable for most people.
Yep, you get 6 different appointments for, I think the price is going up, but it's still going to be very, very cheap. And that's something to have in your quiver. Many other countries, Jetro, Kotra, MIDA, the Malaysian Investment Development Agency as well, they all have similar programs that very often are funded by the government, so they're not so expensive. So
exactly.
Stephen or Yvonne, do you have anything else that you want to add to that concept of business planning versus emerging plan, and how much do you work off of your gut and kind of responding to what you see versus having things planned out?
Yvonne, did you want to go?
Yes, well, what I was thinking that one probably great learning that we find is really time is precious, right? So when you are going to launch a new market, you need to be very cautious to really identify what could be really a powerful connection, and that is really very helpful for us to identify our DNA as a company. What we really understand what our company was, we was able to identify our best niche of events. For example, last year we just decided to choose 3 critical events that one of them was, I could say, well, quite expensive, but definitely help us with the right audience, with the right clients. So that was very, very key. And also we have a mix between engineers and human capital. So we are a very awesome team in that sense. So we love methodologies. And so we try we choose for our business plan to follow Canvas, and help us a lot with our value creation. So I definitely recommend to follow this methodology, and of course follow your instincts, yes, your intuition. Thank you, Stephen.
Perfect. And I'll just say there's 2 ways that we would go about doing it. It's either the top-down approach or the bottom-up approach. Top-down approach would be going to export.gov. That's the Department of Commerce's website. On that, there's 4 options there. You'll click on Market Intelligence, and then you'll scroll down to Top Markets Report. And that will list from the International Trade Administration the various industries that are assessed from the National Trade Administration. You would click and see exactly which markets would be best for your particular product or service. So that's top down. The bottom up would be understanding what your product or your widget service is and contacting someone on the ground, whether it be through the Global Chamber and their networks locally or LinkedIn, but getting information on the ground where you're actually identifying a local subject matter expert to say, this is my product or service, what's happening in this particular market based on the product or service that we have to offer. And you'll be able to get insight there, and then you can make a decision on how you want to proceed.
Okay, that sounds good. You reminded me of a data that I wanted to share because I think it was Julia who mentioned this. The actual data around exporting in the U.S., 1% of companies export. 1%, so 1 in 100 U.S. companies export, and the GDP percentage is actually 15%. So it's a little bit better than the 3% that it might have been at some point. Back in the 1950s, it was kind of in that range. But 1% export, many other countries do much better than that. Denmark, as an example, is 5% of companies, so 1 in 20. As you might expect, a country that's surrounded by other countries, is going to be more export oriented. And it's certainly a lot of the reason why we're all working toward exporting no matter where we are. When we see, for instance, a Kathmandu company exporting to Dubai, which we saw recently, we get really excited, and those are all really, really good things. You all talked at some level about distribution and creating a network and how to manage the network. How would you suggest people approach that depending on what their product and service is as you go around the world? There's a lot of countries. So the first step is deciding where you're going to sell. So maybe start there. And then secondly, how are you going to go to market? Are you going to do it yourself, meaning your own organization, or through a party? How do you go through those processes? First deciding where to sell, secondly, how to sell.
I can take this if you guys want. I think what's easiest for us is where do we have the strongest access point? Where are our stronger relationships? If we know someone in that particular country that may specialize in that product, then we would go there first. We've found that to be easier because they know the local market, the language, the logistics, the economical situation, things like that, what the demand may be. Going that route tends to do better for us.
Okay, very good. Julia?
And one last piece, it's going to be less costly having someone local versus you trying to take on that assignment on your own and trying to go to a new market and figure it out once you get there. It's so expensive to do that. And most companies don't have the capacity to handle that.
Expense travel, expense return, manage customers, things like that. Absolutely. Julia, it sounds like, am I correct in assuming that you go direct in most cases?
Yes, and part of, now I've gotten a little bit more where I do some research into which countries are the best to focus on. I mean, for example, early on, I thought Brazil would be a great market because their consumer market was booming, and I put a lot of time and effort into it until I finally learned that there's like 100% import tax there. And setting up distribution is basically impossible. So I kind of X'd that off the list. And so I do a little bit more research now into which are the easier economies to enter.
Gotcha. Are you an e-commerce site? Is that what you have, or?
I sell directly to retailers, and I also have e-commerce, and that's one other way that I've been able to expand. I do sell on Amazon, and Australia is becoming one market that they're interested in expanding into, and so we do get some orders from there. I mean, I'm always pretty shocked when I get a big consumer order on my e-commerce site from someplace overseas because it's expensive to ship there. But they end up being like a consumer will come on and order like $1,000 worth of product, and then it makes the $100 for shipping worth it. But I'm still surprised when people do it, but it happens a lot.
Okay, great. You do an export dance when that happens? When those
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Yvonne, how about you? How have you guys approached that?
Well, in our case, I would say the opportunity also find us. What we did, and probably is one of the easy ways, is we review our clients database and we start to ask who would be interested to have the service in other countries. And what we found is that many of them, they say, wow, finally, that's awesome. Yes, let's go, because they know us from our US based service. So that was one resource. And the other resource that we, in our operation model, is we identify potential partners in the country that we want to go into, and that will help us to explore the market and present the product and services, and later on establish the commercial relation.
Gotcha. Very good. We have a question from Juliana from Lima, Peru. And so Juliana asks, and this starts maybe with Julia, and you can go around if you'd like. I'd like to know from Julia more about the way she obtains prepayment that she commented on. What organizations and in what conditions are you able to do that?
Well, that was another thing that was very surprising to me. I was encouraged by other vendors like me to get payment before I ship. Plus, I kind of knew intuitively that once you ship the goods internationally, you may never see the money. But I thought, oh my gosh, like, are these people actually, like, when I tell them they've got to pay ahead of time, going to do it? But they do. So it follows my motto of you don't ask, you don't get. But when we're at these trade shows, we tell them, you know, we expect prepayment. And it's really much easier to get payment ahead of time than you would think. The most important thing, though, I would say, is what you need is an account at a major national bank, because you need a SWIFT code. Otherwise, if you're trying to relay a SWIFT code through a smaller bank, it gets really screwed up. So you have to go to somebody like a Wells Fargo or a bigger bank and ask them, do they have a SWIFT code? You set up an account and they give you all of the incoming transfer information, and you send it off to people, and magically this money appears. Then we started saying to people, this surprised me even more, but when we have to get a shipping quote, the only way that we can get a shipping quote is to pick and pack it. And once we put the money into doing that, we don't want to have to reshelve it. And so when we get a really big order, like I just got a $50,000 order from Saudi Arabia, we said to them, we need half before we pick and pack it, because we want their commitment to actually take the order, and then we'll give you the shipping quote. So every time I ask for these things, I'm shocked that people do it, but they do.
Okay, so good question.
You just ask, and you make sure you've got an account set up and easy wire transfer information. I also have found out that American Express and maybe other credit cards, you can pay internationally. So if they've got a credit card, they can also pay us. Then we pay a fee for it. And you can do it internationally on PayPal. So there are other ways to get money. I just haven't used any of them yet. I just like to see the cold hard cash show up in the bank.
So, and besides Wells Fargo, BBVA, Compass, BMO Harris Bank, even some relatively smaller banks like Bank of Oklahoma, Bridge Bank, these are all member banks of Global Chamber, and so we know that they have those SWIFT codes, and it's very popular.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's really important.
So, very good. Yvonne or Stephen, any comments about that question?
Well, I would say that on that area, it's that definitely work in your products or service agreement. It's key. So you need to define, in our case, it's very clear defined what is going to be what is the outcome, what is the delivery, and what happens if the client fails, right? So that's a key component. The legal piece, the compliance, is key component. And my best advice is really ask for help. Don't try to do everything by yourself, because that's the reason that many experts are there, right? And so it's very important that you have a great attorney, right, who really understand international markets, commercial practice. That's very important. The accounting side, super critical. I know sometimes to have a CFO or an accounting firm sounds expensive, but over the time you will appreciate it. It's very, very important. And to create, this is what we call the infrastructure of support. When you are going to go across the border, make sure that you know which people can help you.
That sounds good. You know that very well, Stephen, don't you? You've done the research on your end, not just with government agencies, but with other organizations.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will say really quickly, we don't ship anything internationally without prepayment or some form of insurance, credit risk insurance tied to that transaction, because you just never know. And it's once it leaves the dock, you have no control over it. So I'd rather be safe than sorry. And when I'm working with clients, I make sure that they understand that as well. But at the same time, for a company to be willing to wire you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars up front, they have to have the confidence in you and your ability to perform. So it's making sure that you're building that relationship along the way through the various communications, what they see online, et cetera, so that they will feel comfortable. But and then we also stagger payment. So we'll stage it where there's a deposit, X percentage at placing the order, and then depending on if things are being built, et cetera, they're paying everything prior to it leaving the dock.
Gotcha. Great. And not just the U.S., which has the Export-Import Bank of the United States, but most countries, certainly major ones, have their own similar organization. And so if you're in South Korea or wherever you're located, you have organizations that provide the kind of insurance that you've all referred to. So thank you very much. We only have about a minute or two before we need to sign off. Any final comments or anything else that maybe we left out or that we should be aware of?
Well, one other resource I'll mention, and I haven't had the opportunity to use it yet, but there's something called Now Accounts, and they actually also for a fee will take on your receivable, but they need to approve the company ahead of time. So if you're dealing with a bigger company, it's another way to get an assured payment.
Okay, great. Well, you've introduced the Now Accounts and ABC Omega, so those are I've never heard of. So again, it goes to, I've been doing international for 30 years, and there's always something new on the horizon. So
Exactly.
I want to thank all three of you for your time today. This was awesome. Really appreciate that. Our next steps with our Globinars, we do at least one, often two a week, and our next one is actually around construction and infrastructure on the 29th of this month. And then right after that, we have a really interesting one. It's about how the Asian workforce is changing. I'm very excited to say that we've got three pretty amazing speakers for that, including the head of North American strategy for the Toyota Motor Company, and also a director with Jetro, calling in from Tokyo actually on the 7th of December. So appreciate everyone's participation today from the speaker side, and also of all the attendees. This event will be up on blog post, and maybe my last comment will be around the resources that we just kind of touched on. Our last event was a few days ago. It was about buying and selling a business across metros and borders. And it was an interesting, from the standpoint of these other resources that we touched on, legal, banking, logistics. There's a whole series. In fact, I think we came up with somewhere between 8 and 10. If you're buying or selling a business, these are the 8 or 10 resources that you need. And so those kinds of things, that's part of what we love to do, is understanding all of the resources within our own communities, but also now with Global Chamber everywhere, understanding what those resources are on the other side as well. And so thank you all for sharing your tips and ideas, and look forward to working with you going forward. Thanks everybody, and have a happy Thanksgiving.